Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this latest Technology Network's Ask Me Anything. My name is Alexander Beadle. I'm a science writer and editor for Technology Networks, and I'm excited to be the host of today's session. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Sharat Warrior, who is the head of Cell Culture R&D at Ivy Farm Technologies. Now, as the name suggests, this AMA session provides you with a unique opportunity to ask our distinguished guest absolutely anything about their work, background research, science, and innovation in their field. Before we begin, I'd just like to highlight a few important details. Firstly, this is a live session, and we're thrilled to have so many participants joining us today. And many of you will have already submitted some questions when you registered. However, don't worry if you haven't submitted any questions yet. There is still time, as you can add your questions during this live session. Simply type your question into the box on the right-hand side of your screen and click send. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible before the session concludes. If you do run into any technical issues throughout the webinar, just click the chat icon in the bottom right corner of your screen to request support, and a member of our team will be sure to help you out. One last thing before we dive in. Don't forget to download your certificate of attendance for this session. We'd love to see you share it on LinkedIn or any other social media platforms. And our team are always active on LinkedIn, so feel free to tag us, and we're excited to see them. Now, without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to kick off this AMA with our first question of the day. Dr. Warrior, could you start by maybe sharing a bit about your background and what inspired you to pursue a career in cell culture and cellular agriculture?
Thanks, Alex. Well, I did my undergrad and post-graduation in biotechnology, looking at fermentation technologies and a project essentially on understanding if marine microalgae could be used as biofuel. So, sustainability was one of the first few things during my education, was one of my key areas of interest. But around that time, one of my grandparents kind of, showed signs of Parkinson's. So then I started getting more involved with the research behind what is out there with regard to pluripotent cells, embryonic stem cells specifically at that point, and where can I actually be active in that field. I got an opportunity to pursue a PhD on understanding the mechanisms and the role or how these embryonic stem cells are derived, made, and what is the potential of these cells essentially. Um, it gave me a real deep understanding and outlook of the potential of these cells that are essentially in like in a manual car is a neutral, and based on how we instruct these cells, they can go into first gear, reverse gear, second gear, become any other cell type of the body. It was incredible. um, from there, essentially, that project was more, for me at least, was about understanding the potential of these cells. And then, as a postdoctoral scientist, I had the opportunity of working at the University of Oxford, in a combined project between Alzheimer's Research UK, Janssen Pharmaceutica, and University of Oxford, where using what I learned, I worked towards building models of cells from the brain or of the brain, essentially. So looking at microglia, astrocytes, and neurons, and building these models that allowed me, using iPSC technology, looking at different hits that were discovered in several genetic studies that had come out at that point, and build in vitro models of the disease, looking at these targets or which cell type is essentially should be targeted, because Alzheimer's is way too broad to kind of just pinpoint onto one thing right now. Um, and then further use that data for one, looking at targets in actual patient brains, postmortem, of course, frozen, uh, and um, and then inform on possible drug targets, essentially. So all of that kind of was my biology background, and in the whole process, essentially, specifically when I was doing the whole embryonic stem cell work, cell culture media at that point, you could buy several different commercial grade media, but when I had started in that field, most of it still was using serum, animal based serum, so fetal bovine serum. And one of the first targets or first tasks I focused on was essentially doing complete cleaning of the media, so removing serum from the media and much more defined conditions for the growth of the cell, so we have a lot more control on that growth, essentially. Um, and while all of this was happening, and while I was building my experience, I had kids. I had twins. And I started thinking about where, I can apply everything I really learned in the past 10 years of working in the industry and studying in this industry. And like I said, sustainability was already kind of key when I was in the formative years of my education. Um, and cultivated meat was an upcoming concept at that point. And I remember, there was the big splash of news from the Netherlands when Mark Post unveiled the first cultivated meat burger, which was incredibly expensive then. So then I started digging into this field. I started looking at what is out there, who's working in the field, and I discovered there was a lot of there was a lot of people working on this, and there's a lot of research happening. um, and luckily I found Ivy Farm, local to where I was, working on the same topic. um, and it just it's like addition. I have the skill set, there's work happening. I would like to apply my skill set in a field that was and is very dear to my heart, and want to make give a little of my contribution in my years on this planet towards making it better for my children.
Sounds like a perfect match of backgrounds to me. I guess following on from that, the next question that I have here would be, what makes your current line of work so different from traditional biotech?
That's a very interesting question. A lot of the skill sets are transferable. You use the same knowledge that you have, but in the end, in traditional biotech or biopharma, either you're growing the cells to produce a biopharmaceutical product. It could be antibodies, it could be vaccines. But in ours, the cells are the product, right? I mean, we are in the end creating food. So unlike in typical biopharma, where you're not going to eat any of those cell types, texture and taste is not something you really think about at that point. So that's really different in ours. The product is the cells you're growing. So that the material you're growing, the cells you're growing, is key. The taste, the texture, the um, sterility, how safe is it to eat, the profile, the nutritional profile, um, understanding. Let's put it this way: it's very cross-functional. It's cell biology, but it's food science, and to be able to make it at a scale which is reasonable from the point of view of outreach, right? I mean, in the end, you don't want to make a product that is only for a few people. You want everyone to have access to it, which means you need to produce a lot of it. So it's cell biology, it's food science, and a lot of engineering.
Um, we've also had a great sort of general question, I think, come in from the audience that I want to just ask now because I think it will really set us all on the same footing. And they're asking, are cultivated and printed meats already available on the market, or are they still primarily in the lab stage?
No, so Singapore, you can actually buy cultivated chicken in Singapore already. Um, so as markets go right now for sale, FDA has approved for chicken a chicken product to be sold in the US, And Singapore has given, again, regulatory approval for chicken products from two companies. And at the moment in the US, it's not on sale, but in Singapore, you could actually go to one of the butchers there and buy the product. It's incredible.
Sounds like I need to plan a trip to Singapore, is what I'm hearing.
Ooh, I'll join you, Alex.
Um, Fantastic, thank you. Um, we've got a couple of questions coming about the actual cell culture and production here, so I'll jump a few of these along. Um, this person's asking, are there specific nutrients or supplements that you think are especially important for keeping cells like this healthy and growing well?
Very interesting question. I mean, it's key. I'll be honest with you. Um, there are two sides to that question. Um, Nutrients are key to keep the cells healthy, viable for longer, and growing at densities or numbers that are commercially relevant. One.
Mhm.
But they also are the key components that add to the cost, right? It's the basic nutrients. So the key nutrients are simply, in simple terms, what you and I or the animal would need from their feed. You know, the amino acids, the vitamins, the elements, the metals, um, your five a day, essentially, right? But the difference is, unlike growing an animal, we're growing cells. So what we essentially do is provide these nutrients in their raw format. Rather than give an apple, we give the nutrients that are in an apple to our cells. Um, so they're very, very key. And then ensuring the right amount of oxygen, how stable these components are at these different levels of oxygen that you need to give the cells, temperature, maintaining the same temperature that you would have in the animal, um, and ensuring you're removing the waste material that the cells are producing. So it's like literally like growing an animal, but we're growing the cells. Um, s- Simple, but not so simple.
It sounds like that. And there's another sort of related question here as well, which is how does the nutrient composition of cell culture media need to adapt to meet the demands of large scale cultivated meat production while still maintaining cost efficiency and sustainability?
A very good question. I mean, it is literally what I do every day. Um, we as a business are also now at the stage of scaling up, right?
Mhm.
In general, traditionally, media, for most of the media, cell culture media that we use right now, or you buy commercially from Thermo Fisher or any of these big brands, these are media that was developed almost in the 50s and 60s, right? For very different population of cells. Now, we are growing a very specific group of cells that we've selected. We're talking about a 3% population of cells in a sample that we've taken, which would be the size of a die. So it's a needle in a haystack. And they have very specific needs. So what we do, from one, understanding the nutritional profile that these cells need, and further has an impact on cost, to build on that question, is we design our own media. So we tailor our media. So, like I said, they need amino acids, they need vitamins, they need trace elements, all of these components. We know what our cells are using. We have studied it, we've checked it. So our cell culture media is very specifically tailored to the nutrients that our cells are using. So it reduces waste. We don't waste. We're giving how much they need when they need it. And then, from a cost point of view, since we've removed the noise around cell culture media, we're not talking about media that has 100 different components. We maybe halved it just because we now are only giving what they need. And then, instead of buying in small amounts, right? It's cost of goods. The larger amounts we buy, the cheaper the goods are. And this comes down to establishing robust supply chains, one, and then working with these external vendors or companies that have been making cell culture media for years now. So they already have a lot of these supply chains. So building partnerships is the way forward, I believe, to reduce the cost of the media, tailor the media to your population of cells, find the right partners, and in the long term, um, recycle the water. There you go.
Fantastic. Um, and I suppose, sort of related to the last bit you were touching on there, there's a question here from an audience member who wants to know where are we at currently in terms of sustainability in the edible cellular production process, and what are the key technical bottlenecks to lowering manufacturing costs as well?
It's a very good question. The reduction in manufacturing. So there are, again, it's a multi-pronged answer to a complex question. Let's start with the cells.
Mhm.
Cells can be very inefficient, right? You want Why we go through the vigorous process of selecting that 3% population I said is because we want cells that grow robustly in different settings. So the kind of cells we're working with, for example, whether it's muscle or fat, traditionally they like to be adherent. They like to stick to surfaces or matrix proteins, just like in the animal. What we are doing is we're training these cells, that 3% population of cells. We train these cells to grow in what we call suspension culture. One, that allows us. So imagine if you have limitation of cells that need to adhere to something. There's only so much surface area you can give it to grow on, right? But if it's cells, then you you unlock that limitation essentially, because now they're growing in suspension. Um, so that's one way to reduce the cost. Very efficient cells. Um, their kinetics are, when we're training the cells, we're training and selecting the population of cells that grow quickly but sustain viability and what we in the industry like to call shot doubling time. So they make copies of themselves quickly, so making more of themselves robustly but quickly. So that's one. Then from a media point of view, again, scale up and cost. We've selected the population of cells. They're growing really well. We're giving the right media components, controlling the cost that's associated with that, keeping that very, very minimal. Um, and this is something the whole industry is working on for a while, removing animal components, animal derived components, and using more defined media. So one, we can control the quality, we can control the cost, and we can control when I say control, I mean at least keep an eye on it, and ensure supply, robust supply. Because the one thing you don't want is having 100,000 liter bioreactor running and not having the cell culture media because the supply chain has fallen on, and so that's one side. And then the scale up is what we in at least at Ivy Farm, what we like to do is what we call capex light. So um, there are several fermentation tanks or bioreactors, as they're called, available already. There are manufacturing facilities made, ready to go, essentially. Um, Many of these are designed for a very different industry, whether that is for biopharmaceuticals or that is for fermentation. But the idea is we need to train ourselves and ensure our media can work in a setting that's already. We don't want to build a new technology to grow ourselves. Reusing facilities that are already present, um, I think, is one of the key goals towards controlling the costs of scale.
It's a great answer. Thank you. Sorry.
No, no, go for it.
Um, I'm also just interested to ask, what are the toughest parts of working with the cell type that you focus on, in your opinion?
Um, Good question again. I think initially one of the difficult, bits was ensuring or figuring out the best approach towards um, unlocking that suspension adaptability of these cells. Um, I think that took a while, but on achieving that, that opened up a lot of opportunities. To be honest, then I've elucidated this a few times today, but the point is, in the end, the cells are the product. Ensuring it's not just about growing cells, but growing cells that are nutritious, delicious, um, and then once you have that population of cells or that product, getting that to a point, because think of our product right now as a pate, right? But then what you need to then recreate essentially is something that, if you go to a store today and you buy a steak, it's that texture, right? I mean, it's the marbling, it's the muscle fibers. I think that is challenging at the moment. And it is something that I think the whole industry is working on. And I think it's something we as an industry need to get right. Right. I mean, it's it's meat, it's something that's being consumed globally for years now. And if you cannot recreate um, the history or the feel of a steak, I think that's going to be key. That's that And so that is going to be one of the small, uh, challenging things. Then scale up, it was a very good question that you asked about. Scale up is tough. It's a new industry, it's a nascent industry, transitioning from what we've been experimenting with in the small scale lab based approach, and then scaling that up to 10,000-liter bioreactors, produce you know to produce the amount of material we need to be competitive. um, it's new, right? I mean, we're doing something that hasn't been done before, so it's challenging but completely achievable.
Hmm. I know you say it is a challenge. We do have a question here from someone asking about scalability, but also saying scalability and synchronized differentiation remain significant challenges in the development of cultured meat. What progress or what approaches are currently being made to address these issues? So I guess just moving on one step further from what we were just discussing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think most Gen 1 products that we're going to see in the market is going to be something more of a pate like minced kind of product. Textured product, there are companies working on it. There are technologies like 3D printing coming along, but as the question highlighted, scaling that up is going to be complex, and I think that's scaling the 3D texturization of the product um, is going to be a few years down the line.
Makes sense. Um, we have a couple of questions asking about price constraints as well. So I think I'm going to sort of sum all of those up and ask
Yeah.
if you know of any companies that are doing interesting things in the space to innovate around price constraints.
Mm, Good question again. Hi.
It's quite a big question, so feel
Yeah,
free
I
to break
mean,
it down.
yeah, that's the thing, right? I mean, price. We discussed a few of these points already, right? I mean, price comes down to a few factors, and how. I mean, I could speak about how we are going about it is um, highly efficient cells, simplifying the media, and ensuring scale up or large scale production um, has been optimized for high yield, but not as resource intensive, and using sustainable sources of energy. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm aware I've asked quite a few sort of production questions in a row, so I'm going to pivot again, if that's okay.
Go for it. Go for it.
Because we do have quite an interesting question here. This person's asked, while cultivated meat has received regulatory approvals for safety,
Mhm.
long-term health impact studies are ongoing.
Yeah.
How are companies like yours addressing this gap to reassure customers of both immediate and long-term safety? And are there initiatives to proactively study and mitigate any potential risks?
Very good question. Okay. So we are one of the companies working towards getting. We are applying for regulatory approval from a long-term safety point of view. Um, I'm not the expert in this field. I'll be very, very honest. This is not my field, and I know there's a whole team of people working on this side of things in our business. But with the best I can, I'll give it a go. um, you know, so our products, right, are I think there. I'm going to break it down into a few things. The product itself is actual meat. We are growing cells that has come from an animal that was part of the food chain. One, the cells then are grown in a cell culture media that is composed of food grade nutrients. So again, it's all food grade still. The novelty in the production process is the fact that we're growing it in what we call bioreactors or fermentation tanks. What we do to ensure safety essentially is you know there are multiple stop gaps in during the whole process to make sure everything is safe and sterile. We do microbiological testing on the product um, throughout its lifetime, even at the point where we're packaging the product at the end. um, and then the product itself, um, we're not consuming it yet. We don't have the approval yet. We're working on that, but I won't go into the details of what is the plan because I'm not the right person for that. But as a business, yes, we are putting together the strategies that we need to have in place when we are ready for market.
Thanks. And I know you just said that this isn't necessarily your area. So if the answer to this question is, I don't know, that's perfectly fine. But just since you mentioned microbiological testing there, someone has asked if you know what type of toxicological testing is being conducted within the cultivated meat industry to ensure safety.
Yeah, so it's part of when you're submitting your dossier for approval with either the FDA, FSA, or any of the regulatory bodies. Um, w- there's a span of tests when it comes to microbiological testing associated with pathogens that are relevant to the food industry. So that's completely done. A broad spectrum pathological test for several different criteria associated with foodborne pathogens. And we do that in multiple stages. We do that at the point when we isolate our cells or sample the cells from the animal. When we create what we call our bank, which is essentially, you can imagine it as a vault where we have all these different cell samples that we have collected over the years. So, we have beef, we have pork, chicken, veal, and it's growing. And what that allows us to do is never have to go back to the animal again. We have an unlimited source of cells. So we test that again for the same pathogens. And then during the process of scaling up to the final stage, we have multiple stop gaps there based on the requirements from the food approval agencies, and ensure that there is nothing getting in to our system, and that manages the safety profile from that point of view. Beyond that, we're also always testing for known allergens, if any, and any novel allergens that might come up in the process. Since it's a nascent industry, it's new. We want to make sure that everything is checked, tested, and validated against with complete confidence.
Of course, that's a brilliant answer. Thank you very much. Um, the next question that I'd like to jump to here, someone has asked, how do you balance the scientific and ethical considerations involved in cultivated meat production, and what role do these play in shaping your research?
That's quite a question. What can we build on that a little? What kind of ethical questions are we talking about? I mean,
That's all the detail they've given in their question, but I'm sure we can elaborate, we can have a discussion.
I mean, let's put it this way. Um, when it's a difficult question because the whole rationale behind cultivated meat, and I'm speaking for myself now, is the fact that we never need to slaughter an animal, right? We are taking, like I said, we're taking a small sample the size of it, that big, a dice, um, and the animal goes on to live. Um, we do not need to go back to the animal again because, like I said, we have the vault, our bank of cells. Um, so, from an ethical point of view, it's it it opens up the opportunity for discussions on, once cultivated meat is on the market, um, widely accepted, um, is intensive farming still needed? The whole point of ethical and sustainable farming, for example, um, is what we should go for, right? I mean, doing it right, ensuring it's done at the highest standards, um, is how I see cultivated meat and farming moving along side by side. I don't know if that answers the question, but I got lost in my own.
I think it does in my view. I think it definitely sounds like sort of the ethics and cultivated meat are very intertwined,
Yeah.
rather than opposed, is how I'd, yeah.
And in the end, it's up to the consumers to choose, right? What we want to do is give or create opportunities where consumers have the right to choose what they get to eat. Of course, we will work towards ensuring openness when it comes to safety and nutrition, working along with the different regulators, abiding by, you know, the regulations and um, best case approach on how we need to report what we need to report. Um, and, you know, meat, the nutritional profile of meat is complex. It has really good stuff, but it also has, you know, saturated fats and other components which may or may not be good for you. Um, the advantage, again, I don't know if this is really ethical, but the advantage of cultivated meat, and I'm the head of cell culture media here at Ivy Farm, and one of the key metrics, or one of the key mm, core values, let's put it that way, of how we operate in my team is, we give the cells the nutrients they need, but we don't want to give the cells components that might induce um, a phenotype in the cells, which is um, from a nutritional point of view, going to be a hindrance for us. So we can, ourselves, we've done the testing on the nutritionals of our beef cells, and they're high in omega 6 and omega 3s, low in saturated fatty acids when compared to conventional minced beef. Um, so we're already making strides towards a point where one day, once cultivated meat is widely accepted and available to the wider audience, you walk into a store and you choose what fits your um, lifestyle or your nutritional needs. Um, and whether that comes down to, you and the use case, right? I mean, you can think about the different applications of um, a product that you can guarantee the quality of consistently, um, and the applications just open up. You can either mix it with plant-based products. You can, farms or companies that are making animal-based products can mix the cultivated meat along with the animal-based product to reduce the impact on the planet. And it's endless. I feel, the opportunities that this science is going to open up is going to be incredible in the next coming years.
Absolutely. Um, I hate to take it back to a place of regulations, but unfortunately, there are a few more questions on that.
Like I said, it's not my strong. It's not what I focus on, but I'll try my best.
Fantastic. Well, this person is just asking, should there be standards and mandatory GMP regulations to ensure the quality of input cells for cultivated meat production? And how would these standards impact downstream processes like cell yield?
I mean, there are. So it's not the same GMP standards that you'd follow in biopharma. The GMP standards set are very similar to that you would use in the food industry. So, ISO 9000, the 22,000 ISO, or the other one. Anyway, but the point is there are standards that we have to adhere to, from bank to production. Um, and I think it's important, absolutely. Um, when we are so the way we operate essentially is all the material inputs while generating the cells, making the bank, and producing the material all go through that vigorous testing, regime. We get the product or the material used to make our product has gone through the same ISO GMP standard certification, and we ensure that the material inputs have that same standard.
Fantastic, thanks. Um, and another similar question asking, what does the risk assessment strategy for cultured meat look like, and how do companies evaluate and address potential hazards in the production process?
Again, a very good question. Again, not in my.
Yeah.
um, but again, we have a complete team established towards looking at exactly that. There's a risk management, risk assessment team, and again, there are very clear. Um, there's very clear messaging from these regulatory bodies of what is the minimum that is required, and the way, you cannot get regulatory approval from either the FDA, FSA, or EFSA, or the Singapore agency, unless you meet those standards. Your manufacturing facilities, your labs have to meet those standards that have been set forth by these companies, by these agencies.
Of course. There's another question that's been asked here that I think is interesting to discuss potentially. And they've asked, is cultivated meat likely to reduce human consumption of livestock supplements, such as the growth hormone or antibiotics that are required in many factory farming environments?
Excellent question, Alex. Oh, yes, the answer is absolutely yes. We, in our setting, and I think most of the industry, the cultivated meat industry, we don't use any antibiotics. It has been a big talking point when it comes to conventional agriculture, the use of antibiotics, how the swine flu, right? It was a few years ago, how these diseases are spreading, etc., etc. So one of the key things in cultivated meat, or at least from the point of view of IV Farm, is we don't use antibiotics. The whole system is sterile, all the way from culturing the cells to bulking the cells to production of the material is completely sterile. We do not have it's a closed system until we're at the point of packaging. Conventional meat, if I might be getting the numbers a little off, but I believe what you're allowed to have from a colony forming unit, which basically means how many bacterial colonies are on or in the product, is about 10,000 CFU. Our products are below 100 CFU, and it's important. And then the hormone is a very interesting question, right? I mean, we do not need the use of any of these hormones. It's very defined cell culture media based on nutrients that the cells need. It's the basic nutrients. Um, we do not use any hormones. So yeah, it's a very good question, and it kind of yeah. Now that's my that I can answer.
Fantastic. It's a really great answer as well. Thank you so much.
No, thanks, Alex.
There's another sort of like big picture question that's come in here as well that I think is really interesting. With this person asking, how can cultivated meat potentially contribute to global food security, especially in regions facing shortages or environmental challenges?
Very good question again. This has been a key topic of discussion, I think, recently. COVID had a massive impact on food security, and island nations like Singapore, for example, who really import 90% of their food, or Middle East, for example, where it's the environment is so harsh, it's complicated to grow food in conventional ways. I think these are places where um, a cultivated meat approach towards sustainable protein is going to be key. From we to produce the product that we're trying to produce, we let's hone it down to beef, for example, right? We need 90% less land than a conventional farm, um, 60% less water or so to produce our product. The amount of the conversion rate of nutrient in and nutrient you get back is, I think it's 6 times or five point something times more efficient in our process of making cultivated meat than when an animal um, consumes food and then we use the animal as food. It's incredible. So yes, I think it's down the line, from a food security point of view, um, I think cultivated meat is going to play a key role, definitely.
It's a great answer. Thank you very much. We do have a little follow up question here that I want to jump
Okay.
to. This person asking, you mentioned that you will never have to return to an animal after
Yeah.
a sample has been taken.
Yeah.
How long can each sample be used for? Does the quality of meat not reduce over time?
No, so that's again great question. Let me broaden that now. So, like I mentioned, we've taken a sample, we've selected the cells that grow, and we have created a bank. Now, the bank is, we have several different kinds of bank. You have the master bank, essentially, which is a few hundred, you can, that's 100 vials. And then from there, you have research banks that you build from each vial. Um, So every time these banks are getting smaller or you're using these vials, um, you make a new bank, essentially, using the master bank. And then you make a new master bank from the bank. So these are cells that are immortal, essentially can grow without limitation. Um, so we at the moment, it does not, the cells, what cells do essentially, or what we have trained ourselves to do, is make copies of themselves. So the quality over time does not degrade, it stays the same. And we're talking about, more than 100 generations of our cell lines just growing now. And we haven't seen a drop in efficiency, or a change in taste or nutritional profiles yet. Let's put it that way.
Fantastic. Thank you. Um, I think we briefly touched on this point, but I just want to circle back to it again. This question is: how are researchers working to ensure that cultivated meat has the same taste, texture, and aroma as traditional meat?
Um, that's going to be key. That's what everybody in the industry is working on. So the taste. So there's a team at Ivy Farm, that's literally working on product. Right. We at the moment, as a Gen One product, like I said, we you can imagine what we produce as something that looks like a pate, and then, depending on the use case, we work towards, um, there's two approaches. We do our own food science, where we incorporate, a plant protein, and then that gives it more of the texture of a minced product, essentially. The taste is, you know, and this is where I think we as an industry now need to work on, is the messaging and the education. Since the product is actually meat, we've taken a sample, whether it's muscle or fat, from the animal, and we're growing that muscle or fat sample to bulk. It's meat. So the taste and the aroma, is already that of meat. We, when you so and so that's a few ways we're doing that. And then beyond that, we're working with, um, other industry leaders on partnerships on incorporating our, product with their product, which further enhances, taste, texture, um, and other important metrics, mouth feel, how it sizzles on a pan. And I can tell you, when we have the team working in our kitchen, the whole corridor smells like, a full English breakfast. Let's put it that way. Yep. Um, so it's something that we as an industry are working on. Gen one, like I said, we're working on Gen one products, and then I think, in a year or two from now, we'll be working towards more of, the texture and other properties that give it the more, textured meat product like feel.
Thank you for the explanation. It's especially interesting what you said about aroma and flavor, because I think that's probably a very common misconception.
Yeah.
Um, and on that point, we did actually have a question from the audience here saying, how can we overcome consumer skepticism and educate the public more about cultivated meat?
It, a very good question again, and I think it's about outreach. In my opinion, the more, regulatory bodies and companies work together towards, you know, communicating the the reality behind what is the product, right? Um, I think historically, lab grown meat is how, it when you, for those who don't know what it is and don't have, um, haven't had the exposure towards what the concept is, they start sci-fi, it's lab. But essentially, I think, openness and building, that foundational, understanding, or creating an opportunity for the general audience to have that foundational understanding of, it's meat that's just grown like, you're making beer, essentially. but we all love beer.
Very true. There's one other follow-up question here from the audience, asking, uh, following on from previous, do you have specific cell banking procedures in place to ensure the traceability of cells?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a complete profiling that we do of each bank that we make to the parent animal. So we are not just um, doing basic metrics on the cell lines itself, but we're also matching over time, not just at the bank itself, all the way till the end product. We have complete traceability to the parent animal that the sample came from. Completely, yes.
And related to that, there's another audience question here asking, do you always use source cells from biopsy, or do you sometimes use genetically optimized cells, and would that then require final products to be labeled as GMO?
So interesting question. We do both, but we do not do what you call GMO. So what we do is genetic editing, if needed. But we do both essentially. And the difference between GMO and genetic editing, is in a GMO approach, you are inserting DNA into the cells, so external DNA into the cells, and ensuring expression of that external DNA for long-term viability of your cells. In genetic editing, essentially what we're doing is we are rewiring the mechanism within the cell. We're not adding anything in, we're just cleaning up the wiring so that it performs smoothly. So we're not externally adding any foreign DNA into the cells.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think as we come into the sort of final 5-10 minutes that we have, I want to ask a couple of future directions questions because we've had a couple of really nice ones come in over the course
Yeah,
of
that's
this
good.
week's chat. So this one's quite nice. They're asking, how has your work at Ivy Farm Technologies influenced the way you view the future of food production and its impact on global sustainability?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've been at Ivy Farm now for almost about 4 years, right? And I have seen how the industry has moved at an incredible pace. I mean, at least in Ivy and at Ivy, the pace at which we are making progress and we are um, improving, improvising, and building the frameworks towards the bridge between R&D and food. It isn't easy. I'll be honest. It isn't easy to go from a lab-based scientist to now making a product that is safe for human consumption. But in these 4 years, the way we have sped up, operation towards that goal, um, all the while maintaining the high standards and the quality you'd expect for something that I would like to eat. I'd like to buy at the supermarket, or my children need to eat, um, has changed the way I see um, the future of food as our topic of the day. Um, right? I mean, before I joined the Ivy, I'll be honest, I never thought twice about where my meat comes from or what's the source of the meat or has it been sourced responsibly, essentially. And these are conversations that really piqued my interest only after, sustainability was something I was very interested in. But I used to be an avid sports car driver, and for me, it was about fuel at that point. I never thought about food in the same way, right? Uh, we had conversations, or we have conversations about organic food and free roam animals and products derived from free roam animals. But all of that is only looking at one end of that conundrum, which is the quality of the product, but the sustainability of the product and the impact, intensive farming has had and is still having on the planet is not something I really thought about. 92%, cultivated. These numbers I'm giving are based on research that we've done in the industry, and the cultivated meat approach towards producing protein for consumption, the GHG, the major, there's a 92% or even more, I'm not too sure, 92% reduction in greenhouse gas emission just by thinking or by looking at an alternate approach to um, producing that protein that we all need. The amount of meat consumption is not going down, right? I mean, it's going up. And we, you know, based on numbers, by 2050, I think we're thinking about what they're suggesting is about a 70% increase in population. So meat consumption is not going down, it's going up. Population is going up. We need to be mindful about how we are sourcing and producing um, the protein that is much beloved for all of us. I mean, I love my meat. Um, and then, building on one of the questions you asked me, food security. Um, if COVID, if anything, COVID really brought that out in the limelight. Food security is something we need to really, really start thinking about on a very serious
Hmm. It's really interesting reflections for
note.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think we've got time for one last question, so I'm just going to quickly ask: where do you see your research heading over the next 5 to 10 years, and how do you think it might shape your field or the industry as a whole?
Well, again, we have only 3 minutes. I'm going to be quick. I'll try to be quick. Affordability, competitiveness, in the sense that when you walk into a supermarket and you look at a conventional meat product on the shelves, and then you see an Ivy Farm product on the shelf, the price parity between the two products have to be very, very close. I mean, there's no point of having a product there which is extremely expensive and only catering to a certain population, right? It The whole point of what we're doing and why we're doing it is sustainability and giving opportunities to consumers to choose what they get to eat. Um, the next 5, 10 years, ha- show and prove and have that positive impact on the planet. You know, build more facilities which uses more sustainable energy, which further helps with those metrics I've been talking about, reducing the amount of land we use, reducing the amount of water we use, recycling the water for um, reuse within the facilities. I think these are some of those opportunities we have that we can build on, and I think will be key towards expanding the facilities itself, but also giving access to more people to um, try our products, and hopefully everybody will love it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your answer, and thanks so much for joining us today as well. Unfortunately, that does bring our session to a close, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. And judging by the comments that we've had on the platform, I think our audience has found this discussion just as fascinating and insightful as I did. So, thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of your fantastic questions. Before you leave, don't forget to download your certificate of attendance if you haven't already. As I said at the start, we'd love to see it if you share it on LinkedIn. So be sure to tag us so we can engage with your posts and hear all of your key takeaways from today. If you enjoyed this session but dropped in late, don't worry if you missed anything. The full AMA will be available to watch on demand. Feel free to share that link with friends, family, or colleagues as well who you know might be interested. And once again, thank you for all your time and your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Ask Me Anything session in January, which will be focused on body on a chip. So, all that's left to say is thank you, Goodbye and happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Happy holidays, everybody.